Being a medic in the Second World War meant running toward the thing every other soldier was running away from. You wore a red cross on your arm that was supposed to protect you, but in practice, it often made you a target. And if you were captured, what happened to you depended entirely on which front you were fighting on. We will show you what it actually meant to be a combat medic in the deadliest war in human history, what it did to the men who did the job, what it demanded of them in the worst moments imaginable, and why so many of them came home broken in ways that had nothing to do with physical wounds. Before the Second World War even began, there was a legal framework built around the idea of protecting medical personnel. The Geneva Conventions, updated in 1929, stated clearly that medics were non-combatants. They were not to be targeted. Their equipment was not to be destroyed. The wounded they treated were to be left alone. It was a civilized arrangement, and it worked reasonably well in the Western European theatre, where both sides broadly observed it. That protection was never universal, and in the worst theatres of the war, it was essentially meaningless. The red cross on a medic's helmet or armband was sometimes a shield. In the Pacific and on the Eastern Front, it was a bullseye. Once medics figured that out, usually after watching a colleague get shot while treating a wounded man, they had a choice to make. Some removed their markings entirely and went into combat looking like any other soldier. Others kept them because they believed in what the symbol meant, even knowing what it might cost them. That distinction tells you almost everything about the kind of people who became medics. The American system assigned one medic to every rifle platoon of roughly 40 men. He carried no combat weapon. His kit consisted of bandages, morphine, plasma, sulfur powder for infections, and a pair of scissors. That was it. No surgical tools, no proper sterile environment, nothing resembling a hospital. His job was to reach the wounded under fire, keep them alive long enough to be evacuated, and then go find the next one. The most dangerous moment was always the one immediately after a man went down. In the time it takes a sniper to reload, or a machine gun crew to reacquire a target, a medic had to cover open ground, locate the wound, and begin working. He was kneeling, stationary, completely exposed. And he knew that on the Eastern Front and in the Pacific, enemy snipers specifically targeted medics because they understood the calculation perfectly. Kill the medic, and you do not just kill one man. You kill the morale of every soldier who watches it happen, and you sentence every future casualty in that platoon to a slower death. The Germans on the Western Front generally observed the Geneva rules. American and British medics operating in France and Italy could work with a measure of safety, relatively speaking. But the moment you move east or into the jungle, the rules collapsed entirely. In the Pacific theater, Japanese military doctrine had no meaningful equivalent to the Geneva Convention's protections for medical personnel. What American medics encountered on islands like Guadalcanal, Peleliu, and Iwo Jima went beyond anything the rules of war had imagined. Japanese forces booby-trapped their wounded. Wounded soldiers were left in place with grenades rigged to detonate when someone approached. Medics were often the intended victims because Japanese commanders understood that a medic running to help a fallen comrade is a predictable man, and predictable men are easy to kill. After enough medics died this way, word spread through American units. Everyone knew. And yet the medics kept going because the alternative was leaving their own wounded to die alone. The psychological mechanism at work here is something military psychiatrists have studied ever since. The medic's identity was built entirely around the act of helping. Choosing not to run to a wounded man, even knowing it might be a trap, felt like a betrayal so profound that many medics said afterward they simply could not have done otherwise. It was not bravery in the conventional sense. It was more like the absence of a choice. The wounded man was there. The medic ran. Desmond Doss was a Seventh-day Adventist who refused to carry a weapon on religious grounds. He served as a medic with the 77th Infantry Division and saw heavy fighting in Guam and the Philippines before his unit was assigned to Okinawa in the spring of 1945. The position his company was ordered to take was a jagged 400-foot cliff the men called Hacksaw Ridge. On May 5th, concentrated Japanese fire tore into the Americans at the top of the escarpment, wounding roughly 75 men and forcing the rest to retreat back down. Doss stayed. Alone, under fire, on a cliff face occupied by the enemy, he dragged wounded men one by one to the edge and lowered them down on a rope using a knot he had devised himself. He worked through the day and into the night, praying the same prayer over and over. Lord, let me get one more. His Medal of Honor citation credits him with saving 75 men. He was wounded several times in subsequent fighting and eventually evacuated in late May. He returned home and spent years recovering from his wounds and from tuberculosis contracted during the campaign. We are not embellishing any of this. It is all documented. But Doss was not unique in his commitment. What was unique was that he survived. If the Pacific was a nightmare, the Eastern Front was something that resists simple description. Soviet and German medics alike operated in conditions where the concept of a safe rear area had ceased to exist, where front lines shifted by the hour, and where the wounded could not simply be evacuated because there was nowhere to evacuate them to. At Stalingrad, Soviet medics, many of them women, worked inside ruined buildings, in basements, in the rubble. The triage decisions they made would be familiar to any modern trauma surgeon in the worst possible way. You assessed who could be saved with what you had. You moved on. There was no time and nothing to spare for anyone beyond saving. Soviet female medical personnel have largely been written out of the popular history of the war, but the numbers are staggering. Around 100,000 women served in Red Army medical roles, ranging from frontline medics to surgeons. Their casualty rates were devastating. Those who worked in forward positions faced the same exposure as any combat soldier. Many were killed. Many were captured. We have already described in other contexts what capture meant for Soviet women on the Eastern Front. They knew the risk. They went forward anyway. There was a documented Soviet tactic at Stalingrad that illustrates just how dark the calculus became. Snipers would wound a German soldier and then wait. They would wait for a medic to appear and wait for the comrades who came to help. Medical personnel became bait, and everyone involved in this arrangement, the Soviet snipers, the German medics, the wounded men screaming in no man's land, existed in a moral universe so far from peacetime that there is almost no language adequate to describe it. German medics on the Eastern Front found themselves in an equally impossible situation, but with the added burden of knowing that Soviet forces were under no particular obligation to respect their status. A German medic captured in the East could expect to be treated as a prisoner of war, or he could expect something else entirely. It depended on the unit, the moment, and what had happened in that sector in the days before. The uncertainty itself was its own kind of horror. Here is what the after-action reports and the medal citations do not tell you. The medics who survived the war came home carrying something unnamed, something that would not be named until decades later. A combat medic's job required him to be fully present with suffering in a way that no other soldier experienced. A rifleman might kill a man and move on. A medic held dying men in his arms, listened to them speak their last words, watched the light go out, and then stood up and went to find the next one. He did this repeatedly, sometimes for years. He learned the sounds a man makes when he is bleeding to death. He learned the smell. He learned which wounds were survivable and which were not. And he learned to communicate that assessment instantly, without flinching, in front of the man whose wound he was assessing. Post-traumatic stress disorder was not a diagnosis available to these men when they came home. What was available was the understanding that something was wrong with you if the war had affected you, that a real soldier should be able to put it aside and get back to living. Medics had no framework for what they had absorbed. Many drank. Many could not sleep. Many could not speak about what they had seen to anyone who had not been there, and often not even to those who had. One documented account from a medic who served in the European theatre describes coming home and being unable to sit with his family at dinner because the sounds of ordinary domestic life, a chair scraping, a glass breaking, triggered a physical panic response he could not control or explain. He had been home for 6 months before he was able to share a meal with his wife and children without leaving the table. He was one of the lucky ones because he eventually talked about it. Most never did. William Gnaust was the Marine cinematographer who filmed the flag raising on Iwo Jima, one of the most iconic moments of the entire war. He was killed in combat 3 weeks later, still on the same island. John Bradley was a Navy corpsman who was present at Iwo Jima and earned the Navy Cross for shielding a wounded Marine with his own body while administering plasma under direct fire. For decades afterward, he refused to speak about what he had experienced on that island, and his son James only pieced together the full story after his father's death, turning it into the book Flags of Our Fathers. Bradley's own words about the men who died around him were simple. He said the real heroes did not come back. Then he said nothing more on the subject for the rest of his life. These stories get told. What does not get told is what happened to every medic standing nearby who kept working after the man next to him went down. The statistics on American combat medics in the Second World War are stark. They suffered casualties at a rate higher than the infantry they served. A counterintuitive fact until you remember that they ran toward fire rather than away from it, and that they did so without weapons to defend themselves. More than 2,700 American medics were killed in action. Thousands more were wounded. They received more medals of honor per capita than any other non-combat military specialty in the American armed forces. That last fact is both a tribute and an indictment, a tribute to the men who earned those medals, and an indictment of what they were asked to do to earn them. Being a medic in the Second World War meant choosing every single day to be the most exposed man on the battlefield. It meant learning to suppress every self-preservation instinct in the moments when they mattered most. It meant carrying the weight of every man who died in your hands, every wound you could not close, every face you could not save, for the rest of your life. That was the job. Most of them never talked about it. The ones who did said the same thing in different words over and over again. They did not do it for the medals. They did it because there was a man down and someone had to go. If you'd like to see more stories like this, consider subscribing. If this story meant something to you, leave a like and share your thoughts below.